Guess what, everyone? I recorded this video and halfway through, my camera died on me for no reason, error, and it didn't record the video. And I had just spent 15 minutes talking about things. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to my first booktube video. Today I'll be talking about books I'm recommending for your quarantine reading. So yeah, like I said, for your quarantine reading, I have a lot of books that I want to recommend for general reading, but because now in quarantine you probably have some time to sit down and read for longer periods of time to sit down and have some sustained reading. If not, then these are just books that I find kind of relevant for myself and maybe for you as well, to challenge yourself in the kinds of books that you're reading. My reading preferences are generally more towards like heavy reading, more of like challenging my own thinking sort of reading. I have a soft spot for anthropology books as well as psychology books because that's the discipline that I minored in, and I love reading about human behavior and stories and all that creative non-fiction, as people might say it. I'll be recommending 5 books today, and you can find the reading list down below. If you want to add me on Goodreads, the link will be down below as well. So that's really funny. But anyway, book time. The first book I want to recommend is Quiet by Susan Cain. I think the subtitle is like The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. Anyway, this is a book that I read when I was 16, a long time ago, but I think it's still one of the books that really changed my thinking on my perspective towards myself and towards the world. Before this, I've always been a very quiet and introverted person from young. I spent most of my time in libraries. In primary school, I was always in the library during recess reading books. I made it a point to like read the entire shelf of books. Like that was my goal. I don't know why, but to me that was like the most exciting thing then. So I've always been kind of on my own, doing things on my own, and I couldn't help but feel very alien in some sense because a lot of my friends were very outgoing and they were very achieving. But reading this book allowed me that perspective to see my introversion as a kind of strength, to see like my tendency to introspect and my comfort with solitude, something that could be helpful and useful and beneficial to myself. One of the main reasons why I'm recommending this book today is because many of you are probably stuck at home, unable to do anything, or maybe this is the first time that you are facing such long amounts of solitude by yourself. I really like this book a lot because it's not just for introverts or extroverts, it's really about understanding what are the qualities of introversion that we associate with other things like negative stereotypes. What are the things with extroversion that maybe we think are overly glorified, and how do we find a balance between everything? Looking at yourself and finding that strength in your so-called quieter traits, I think that was a very powerful thing for me. And now for a lot of you, I do think it might be a good book to consider, especially now that we're spending so much time alone. Second book I want to recommend is it's Pachinko by Lee Min Jin. This is a book that was published pretty recently. I think it won quite a few awards. It's a book that follows a Korean family through the Japanese occupation as well as the Civil War. And I don't really read a lot of fiction books. I think it's hard for me to get absorbed into the books, but for me, when I read a fiction book and I enjoy it a lot, it really sticks with me. It kind of lingers with me for a long time, and this book was one of them. I have a thing for multi-generational historical storylines, as you can tell later on for my 5th recommendation, but I really enjoy how the story doesn't really end, at one person. It starts maybe somewhat with one person, but it tells a story through so many different perspectives. And I do think that this kind of writing is really underrated, because every time we read, at least for me, a lot of times when I read fiction books, a lot of them are written from a one person perspective, and usually just follows a very strict story, like strict timeline that, you know, maybe is centered around a specific event in their life. But I feel like that's not relatable at all, because for us, like, we are always going through different things. Like, we are always living in relation to other people. So like, maybe person A might be experiencing this, which would then affect me, person B, in a certain way, but me as person B is going through a separate thing, which might then affect person C, who is related to person A. And human relations are complicated like that. So I really appreciate fiction stories that pay attention to that complex human relations. Okay? So if you have time, like, go ahead and read it. I think it's quite a substantial book, but I finished it in about 2 or 3 weeks. I think it's possible. So I highly recommend it. The third book I want to recommend is called The Mushroom at the End of the World, on the Possibility of Life in Capitalist Ruins. Now, this is a anthropological book. It's a multi-species ethnography. If you don't know what that means, it's kind of like a study of I would say a particular cultural phenomenon, or just basically a, you know, like a culture or like a community that takes perspectives beyond just the human perspective. So in this case, the author is taking the perspective of like the mushroom as it goes from being foraged, being transacted, packaged, and then subsequently consumed. This is my first encounter with a anthropological work that is so overtly involving the environment in its analysis, and I greatly enjoyed it, because I do think that this is something that we need more in intellectual writing, I guess, or academic writing, about how we pitch the environment and other non-human actors as people in a complex web. I think now you understand that I really enjoy writing that is quite like, you know, complex webs together. If you're up to a challenge and you want to figure out, you know, if there are ways to write about the environment or write about our human systems and structures in a slightly different way, I highly recommend this book. I found myself like rereading a lot of paragraphs and pages, precisely because I felt like, am I really getting what the author is really saying? Is this argument really possible? You know, rather than, oh, the writing is too chim or whatever, it was more of like, oh, am I really, is the author really suggesting this? It sounds a bit ridiculous at first when I first heard the title, but it makes sense the more you read it. So there's a bit of like a motto outside. And so if you're looking for something more like creative non-fiction, a bit more like analytical, then this is the book for you. The fourth book I want to recommend is a Singlit book. Some of you might have read this before. It did get a bit like popular, but I want to recommend this book because it's easier reading than the previous books I've recommended. It's a collection of short stories written. It's called Ministry of Moral Panic by Amanda Lee. It's short and concise stories that pack a punch. That's such cliche words, but when I first read this is my first encounter with Singlit, beyond just doing literature in school. I was one of those lit kids. This was the first book that I picked up and bought and read, so it has a special place in my heart. But I'm recommending it because I truly believe that this is such a great work of writing creatively, and just it's so vivid and so rich in detail. And like I said before, like, fiction stories I love, they really stick with me, and the motifs and the images in this collection of stories have stuck with me until now. And given that I read this like what, 6 years ago, I mean, that's kind of crazy. It's still in my mind. I can still imagine the kinds of characters that the author created in the story. Those of you who are still working from home, or maybe you're having to transit in and out of your workplace, in this today's context, like you might not have a lot of time to read. So if you do have time to read and you want to read Singlet, I highly recommend this. This is the book that convinced me to read more Singlet. I think now is also a great time to support your local authors. Many of the local bookstores are online now. Maybe I'll put some links also below so that you can buy them. I actually bought a book from Epigram and they delivered on the same day, which is crazy to me. Yeah. Last book is Beauty is a Wound by Eka Kurniawan. So this is an Indonesian author. So the book is translated. I don't think I have enough confidence to even tackle an intermediate reading in Bahasa. This author is pretty, the way he writes is pretty crazy. I think it's a fiction book. I realized I recommended 3 fiction books. Gotta ease y'all into it, because actually only 30% of my entire reading list is fiction. I really love this book. It's also, once again, a multi-generational historical kind of situation. It follows a woman through her journey in colonial Indonesia and etc. Disclaimer, there are pretty graphic descriptions of sexual violence, etc. It's not easy. The reason why I want to recommend this book, even though it's kind of similar in structure to Pachinko, is because it deals a lot with what female beauty means, and it deals a lot with that violence, because Pachinko deals more with family themes and with political loyalties and things like that. But in Beauty is a Wound, the author really goes deep into the feminine myth, a lot about folklore, about history, about narratives, national narratives. And I love it because I am still trying to learn so much more about Indonesia. This is really the book that started it all for me, to read the so-called there's just so many parallels. There are motifs and the kind of characters and the plot. It's a pretty heavy book. It's pretty thick, but it's like a condensed history of Indonesia, but told in such a haunting way. So if you find yourself a bit superstitious, you might not want to read it too late at night, because there's talk about superstition and ghosts and all that. But I really love the book. I myself relate so much to that complex relation of the female beauty myth, in where a female beauty is seen as a threat, but yet is revered to such an extent. Men either love it like crazy, they go crazy for it, or they enact such violence against it. They love it so much that they kill it. That kind of feeling. I think it's such a strong story. Yeah, so those are my 5 books. I hope you will pick one of them up. If you do, let me know. If you've read any of the books before and you want to share some thoughts about them, please do in the comments. I love finding more books to read. Like I mentioned before, The Mushroom and the End of the World was not a typical reading for me, but it definitely opened my eyes to wanting to read more about environment, about climate change, etc. And a lot of these books were my starting points into different categories of books. I hope they will be starting points for you as well. I know a lot of people like to read things like Atomic Habits, or the 5 top most effective things that leaders do. I don't know, but those books I don't really read. I think that's fine. I think those are kind of good reminders for your everyday living. But I do think the beauty of reading books is really to expand your world and to expand your thinking, and these are the books that help me do that. Just to give a preview of what other books I might have in store, I have books on psychology, maybe some on mental health. I also have books on feminist readings, as well as maybe more gender studies readings. I hope to do one on masculinity studies, because that's not something that I hear a lot about, but I have read. I also read a lot of things about culture. um, I am thinking of doing a hip hop as global culture reading list, because that's kind of very pertinent today. Not just that, but I also have some urban studies books, because I went on a frenzy once and I read like 4 or 5 urban studies books. Yeah, and so I have a lot. I think the only thing that's lacking is really actual fiction in my reading list. So if you have any recommendations for me as well, I'm trying to look for more light-hearted readings that are still great. So if you have any, please let me know. And that's all. Thank you for watching, and I hope to have a video like this out every Thursday, because booktube Thursdays. But thanks, and see y'all.